When we last left our heroes, they had just released probably one of the most commercially poor heavy metal records of all time. And I actually spent time trying to defend this sucker. Yeah, that shows just what Megadeth can actually do to you, and why it's sometimes really cool to be an album reviewer. You get to examine things from a whole different perspective, devoid of just following the herd. Now, in the 2-year span ever since that album was released, they had underwent various major tours. The record had gone gold, and, well, they changed record companies. Well, it was time for a fresh start. So the band released a greatest hits package before their official departure in order to fulfill contractual obligations, and then moved over to Sanctuary Records, where they would be releasing their next album, their 9th studio release, entitled The World Needs a Hero. After the disappointment of Risk, the initial goal of Megadeth was to return to thrash metal, to kind of go back a little bit closer to where their roots were, as opposed to the more commercial direction that had been derived throughout the past couple of albums throughout the 1990s. It's a sublimation of what the band had become in that stretch. The result that you get from The World Needs a Hero is a very mixed bag. It's filled with very good songs. It's filled with some songs that are very forgettable. The one thing it really seems to lack a lot of is consistency. This is an album that kind of jumps all over the place. It goes into areas of more commercial-friendly hard rock / metal that fans were very used to in the 1990s, from albums such as Euthanasia and Risk and Cryptic Writings, to teetering a little bit more along the lines of things that they did with albums such as Rust in Peace. There are songs on here that borrowed ideas from Countdown to Extinction's Sweating Bullets. There was the second part to the Hangar 18 series entitled Return to Hangar, and there was the ballad Promises. So what you have here is a collection of songs that really are Megadeth just being Megadeth. And after the management of the past couple of albums had led this commercial direction and mainstream backlash, they were promptly fired. This was a Dave Mustaine-produced affair. Now, with all this said, the question still remains, is this a good album or not? Is this an album that actually deserves to be near the top of the Megadeth food chain, now 9 albums in, or is it one that actually teeters closer to the bottom, along with albums such as Risk? And the answer to this question is not one that can easily be really given. It's really going to depend a lot on the listener. Those who really embrace the 1990s era of Megadeth may actually enjoy this mixed bag, calling it to be one of those albums that is subtly good, that has a lot of very strong tracks that you can easily get behind. Whereas more old school fans are going to determine this album to be just another mainstream commercial attempt at success. Myself personally, as a reviewer, I take a listen to this album and I think to myself, this is one that perhaps if it had just a little bit more direction to it, perhaps if it was just a little more focused, could have really been something very good. The seeds were really sown for the groundwork of a full-fledged Megadeth revival, where they were going to really turn the tides and go and distance themselves as far away from the commercial rock and commercial metal ideas from the 1990s as humanly possible. However, this was not the album where that was going to take place. That metamorphosis wasn't going to happen the album directly afterwards. It was just something that was completely and utterly asinine to think that was going to occur, considering they've been writing this way now for half of a decade. So it's not something that you just wean yourself off of magically. So, for what it's worth, this album does break at about average. This is an album that contains some songs that could easily be listed in top 10 lists, but at the same time, there's a lot of tracks on here that are largely forgettable. There are songs on here that you'll easily want to make you want to pick up a guitar and play, considering you have names such as Dave Mustaine and Al Pitrelli playing, so, we're talking Megadeth legendary, and we're talking Sabotage legendary in Megadeth. It's almost like an all-star cast. But there's also tracks where you just are kind of left scratching your head as to, is this the best that we could get? I believe this album is going to rank right along the lines of a 7 out of 10. And that might even be a little bit generous. To pose the answer to the question that I asked earlier, that being whether or not this would be at the top of the top of the task or the bottom of the barrel, it actually would rank a little bit closer to the bottom. This is an album that, whenever it first came out, I really enjoyed, but time has not really done it many favors. Not to mention, I believe that whenever I was younger, and I believe that whenever a lot of us are younger, we are unfortunately kind of superimposed a predominant fanboyism to us. And that's something that we ourselves have to wean ourselves off of with age. This is an album, though, however, that will always go down as a stepping stone. This is an album that will go down as the first real sign that the ship was being righted, so to speak. In fact, that was something that Dave Mustaine himself even commented on the album by saying it seemed as though this was an album where they were trying to set the ship right once again and kind of turn it back into the right direction. Almost as though they were on a voyage to America from Europe, and all of a sudden they turned, really hard bank to the right, and they were heading up towards Iceland or something like that. And all of a sudden Dave Mustaine was like, "Oh fuck, what the fuck are we doing up here? It's goddamn cold." So he turned the ship around, and now they were heading back to where they were originally intended on going. Either way, the stepping stone is something that a lot of fans considered typical, and at that particular time frame, we had no way of knowing what the future was going to hold. Of course, considering you're watching a review of this album in 2011, 10 years after it was released, well, you kind of know where Megadeth has gone since then. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't stick around, because it's time for us to talk about a truer return to form. One that actually makes a lot more sense, and actually happened because of tragedy.